Welcome back to ClapTrap, the show on the internet. I'm Trent.
And I'm Zed.
And what are we talking about today, Zed?
Well, it's your topic, so why don't you tell the audience?
Well, fuck you. Today we're talking about world building.
World building. Haven't we already talked about that?
Yeah, this is a follow-up to that because world building is a pretty broad topic, right? So
Do I sense a series coming?
it could be. I could definitely do
It
a
could
series
be.
on world building.
I could too, and I'm sure the audience would be happy to check that out.
Yeah. Well, I hope they would be. Like, comment, subscribe if you'd be happy to check that out. So,
All right, so
the homework for this
Jinx.
episode is you were supposed to watch the other world building episode, but
and I didn't.
and you did.
I
You did not. You did not, and I
didn't.
hate you.
I did college homework instead.
What a waste of time.
Objectively, yes. So,
So, well, we were kind of all over the place. I did rewatch the last episode where we did world building,
Yes.
or re-listen, whatever, and we were really all over the place. We didn't stick to a consolidated idea about, we just talked about kind of just the rough process, and then we talked about a bunch of pieces of media that we thought had good world building and kind of why. But we
Yes.
didn't touch on any details. Zed, what details of world building do you want to explore today?
well, I'd like to go into culture, politics, socioeconomic politics,
Okay.
language, religion, just the fine nitty-gritty details of what makes these people tick. Because, we could go into architecture, we could go into landscape, history, all day long. But I feel like that's
Architecture
been
is
covered.
one of my weak links. I haven't touched on that as much as I ought to have.
Well, I feel like architecture goes hand in hand with like the land it's located on.
I agree. That's what I do most with I try to make cool geographical oddities and things that tie into city building and whatnot. But culturally specific building design, things of that nature, I've not really dabbled in too much. Have you?
Well, actually, yeah, I've done it to a degree. Like, it makes sense to me that a very forested area full of elves and fairies and stuff would be more wooden buildings, more camouflaged over,
Right.
with things like that. The dwarves and living out in the desert would have more stone-based architecture and a lot of underground caverns that they live in just out of necessity because of how hot it is.
Right.
And things like that. And then, I forget the element. What, in Minecraft, that purple stone, what's that called?
Purple stone.
From the lava, you get it in the...
Oh, it's more of a black stone. It's called obsidian.
And it would make sense that, I'm working on a fantasy role-playing game, and there's this Oblivion-esque country that I have, everything's made out of obsidian because, lava, it makes sense.
Well, in Minecraft terms it does, but actually obsidian in real life is not that good. I could tell you more about it later, but obsidian is just flint, right?
Yeah.
It shatters like glass. Okay, well, that might make for a poor structural foundation.
Yep.
All right, what else do you want to talk about?
Okay. You'll understand it soon.
Okay.
So,
You could have explained it to me now, but all right.
no, I don't want to spoil my project
Okay,
at all.
then why didn't you say, well, there's a reason for it?
Because I'm the audio editor, and I can keep this all in and cut out the pauses, and it becomes funny.
All right.
So, when you're building a world, what's the strongest thing? What is the thing you probably do too much of?
Language.
Language.
You know me, Zed. I'm looking at my binder right now, and I've got dozens of pages of many versions of many alphabets and writing systems, and just sheets filled up with prototype script to see how it looks when I put it together. So you're
That's cool.
yeah, you're very aware of how much time I would spend doing script and language stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, especially, I do work on words, not as much as I ought to, and sentence structure and whatnot for my fictional languages, but not near as much time as I put into the writing systems. I love fantasy writing systems, and most of them look like just dog shit. I think. I don't know. It's. I feel there are too many fantasy stories, or like even I think it's more prevalent maybe in like TV and stuff, fantasy shows and sci-fi shows, and they're like sci-fi. I think is like really bad at this. It's like oh, how about an alien language, and they'll just make up a bunch of symbols that don't flow together, that are swirly and weird, and just like make them stand-ins for the A through Z Arabic alphabet,
Yes.
and that's pussy shit. Excuse me. And the English alphabet's really weird in that it's not really that phonetic, and so I think that's stupid. I think we should have like phonetic writing. So most of my alphabets are like based on phonetics, and but of course I've made some of them less phonetic just because that's real life. There obviously are languages that aren't like made with that in mind near as much. English being one example, but about the OG language of Durish. So
I know the OG Durish.
And
The writing system of that.
yeah. So I mean, what do you know about it? Why don't you tell the story of your experience with watching me create it through the years?
Okay, so I don't know how to speak Durish. You never gave those secrets to me, but as far as
It's
the alphabet's concerned,
the speech system is just not fleshed out enough to actually speak it yet.
okay. So with Durish itself, it's a symbol representing a consonant sound. Now the key word is sound.
Yes.
Like ka, ka is one thing. The is a letter.
Yes.
Or a symbol. And
I even have specific letters for most consonant blends. Like thr, like TRH or THR.
Yes.
That's its own thing, separate from th. And
so you've expanded quite a bit.
yeah. There's like there's like probably close to 70 consonant letters, and and when you add in the vowel accents, you could probably, like, if you count a consonant letter with a vowel accent on top of it as its own unique thing, I guess you could say there are probably thousands of unique characters in the Durish language.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And I remember the vowel sounds is symbols that go over the consonant sounds.
The accents. So when I say accent, when you see a Mexican E and it's got the little the squiggle line over it that makes it the A sound, that's an accent. And all the vowels in Durish are just accents that go over the consonant letter that precedes them.
And the spelling in Durish is always what got me.
Yeah, because English is not a phonetic language. You have to spell it exactly how it's pronounced. And
Yes.
And in English, that's just not done. One of the things that bothers me most about English is the DR consonant blend. Dr, and it's language evolves. Like, this happened naturally, so I can't be mad at anybody for it. But it's not DR anymore; it's JR. We spell things DR, but when you say dragon,
dragon, I see what you're saying.
yeah, you use a J when there's an R following a D. And that's not how it used to be. So, like, if you listen to a fantasy or Old English like thing, it's like, I think this is like let's talk about a Transylvanian accent, because people, it's so funny how Dracula says Dracula. That's how it should be pronounced phonetically. And dragon. It sounds like I'm making an accent, but I'm just actually pronouncing that D.
Yeah.
And that's something that always bothers me. And and I don't know how, there's other examples like silent letters.
Oh God, silent letters are awful.
Silent letters were not put there on purpose. So in Old English, the words actually were pronounced that way, but people shortened them. So like knife in Old English was knife, and
Yeah.
and that took too long to say, I guess. So people shortened it. They just started saying knife for short, or it kind of flowed together, knife, and you kind of lose that K, but it's written the same way, and that's how we ended up with silent letters. And I actually there was a linguistics YouTube channel. I'm really showing like how much of a true just geeky asshole I am in this episode. But there's a linguistic YouTube channel I watched a lot, and they were talking about this. So let's talk about the history of the English language for a minute. So the English language was originally a Germanic language, right?
Yes.
And then it had Roman Latin words kind of peppered into it when the Romans, the Roman Empire was expanding and they were, conquering every place. And the furthest they reached in that direction, the Romans did for a time conquer the southern border of the British Isles and England, and the Angles, the Anglo-Saxons at this point, I guess. So they were speaking Germanic English, true Old English, and then some Roman words started getting interjected into that, and that's how we kind of ended up with the English we have today, which is a hybrid. Because in most European, Western languages, most of them come from two branches, Germanic and Romance, which means from the Germanic peoples and from Rome. And
we have some Latin mixed in too.
Latin is what they spoke in Rome. So
okay.
that's Romance languages are derived from Latin.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's why English has Latin roots and Germanic roots because the Roman Empire invaded and it came to the point. So the people who were in England buddy with the Romans were were nobles, and it was they kind of buddied up to their conquerors to gain social clout. And and so the people who were speaking more Roman Latin words were at a higher level. And that it's fascinating to me how that has carried through into modern culture, because it came to a point where Latin derived words were more proper and noble to say, whereas the Germanic derived words in English were more for the common peasant man, And so, Zed, back home, what's the word in Appalachia for family?
Family?
Yeah.
I just kinfolk.
Yeah, kin. Kin is the Germanic word for family, and that was the Old English word for family is kin. And family comes from the Latin familia. So nobles and classy people were saying family, and the poor folk are saying kin. And that's why
and
people where we come from say kin.
Yeah, and Appalachians are immigrants from the Great Britain area, the British Isles. So that would make
primarily
a lot of sense.
Ireland, I think. So yeah, and
so Hopkins is an English name.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's plenty of English there, but I think the majority of Appalachian settlers were Irish.
Okay, fair enough.
So, but a lot of Irishmen probably knew English.
Okay.
Especially at that point in history. But that difference between Latin and Germanic in England during the Roman conquest days is also why we have different words for animals and the meat they produce. I think this was talked about in a Vsauce video. And so the poor folk hunted the animals, right?
Yes.
And the nobles just ate them. So they understood them kind of as two different things. So the nobles' words for an animal became what is known as the word for its meat, and the poor folks' name for an animal is what is known as it as a living creature.
Yes.
So we, the lower class people saw a pig, and their word for it was pig, or boar, maybe at the time, something like that, and the nobles knew it as pork. They were referring to it as an animal, but they only understood it as meat, and so that kind of transformed into what it is today.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
So what I'm liking about this is I can easily transition into my favorite element of world building myself.
Okay.
And that is a timeline. I love history and world building.
Okay. That's something I also slack on, just because, I think about the point in history where I want my story to take place, and then I'll build up to it, but it's like I slack on my history, like in a world building, like as a concise, its own project kind of thing, So that's your thing. Why don't you tell me about it?
Okay, so what I love about history is I can start at a point of creation.
Yeah.
And I can develop societies forward.
Mm-hmm.
I can develop the land, have like continental drifts, have land masses be created, destroyed, cities created and destroyed, so I get to place ruins there.
Yes.
Like, this sword was enchanted and used to kill a king. Well, now that sword lies somewhere in a mountain. To me, history is such an important thing because it explains everything. It is everything. So as the societies develop, the language develops,
Yes.
the technology develops, it's all history, and you can always look back on it to explain why something is the way it is, from the landscape to the people.
Tolkien was very, very good at this. I know you haven't read all the
Elder
way through
Scrolls
Lord of the
even.
Rings, but if you just want Tolkien world building, read the Silmarillion, because it's all history. It's all the history of Middle Earth from its conception to right before the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
And you'll see things from the Lord of the Rings, and you're like, that's where that came from? I can't believe it,
Yeah, there's a lot of like random details in the films. Like, I remember when they were taking the boat through the river, and there's these two giant statues, and all kinds
they
of
stole that
things
from
like
Naruto.
I'm sure they did. But yeah, I just love writing history, and I write my history out in the outline.
Yeah.
So, reoccurring viewers will learn that I love outlines when doing anything like this.
Yes.
So
you talked a lot about your outlines, both in the first world building episode and the last one we did on story building last week.
Yes. But I do an outline, and I usually go by 100 years, and then I break it down to 50 years, and so on and so forth.
Okay.
And then from there, like if you're doing an entire continent like I do, you can break it down, and then you can break it down even further to each individual country.
Right.
And if you want to get really detailed, you can break it down to towns. And then you could write about what went on in that town during that time, and you can make it as detailed as you want, but it's a lot of work. And
right. I would probably reserve getting that microscopic for like only major events. Something that really changed the geography of the whole country, or the surrounding area at the very least. Yeah, I would probably go down to like a county level.
Yeah.
And then I would, call that a day.
I think
because I work on. Excuse me, I think I tapped the mic, but I work on such like big worlds that it's like getting that far down is like that is too much work, because I'm doing multiple continents and multiple worlds just for one story project,
Yeah.
So I like to think of, I've kind of got like my continents and even countries sequestered into like sections in my mind, like, just geographically, like what's different about them and like how that will affect things. But I never get like that detailed because I want to keep mostly like zoomed out to like see how these things as they develop on their own are interacting with one another, because the other places in the world are going to affect things going on so much, and trade and all that, and war.
Well, yeah, war is a thing. Something
never changes.
That's another reference. So, like, war, that's a good one. Something I like to do historically is use war as a tool. So, like, fighting over resources, fighting over land.
Some other people like to use war as a tool.
Fighting over resources, fighting over land.
Yeah.
And I've never actually written a war that wasn't for a utility purpose. I've never done a an offense, like somebody offended another culture war or
Really, those are the
a
most famous
religious.
ones.
I know, but I don't know. It just those wars are so stupid.
I mean, they are, but it matters. You know,
Well,
it's a war. Whatever
it's
started it. A lot of wars start for silly reasons, silly drama reasons, and that just has to be understood. You know.
I don't know. Fucking. It's fantasy. It's meant to be unrealistic, but to some degree,
it's meant to be unrealistic on some levels, but to be a good story, it also has to be realistic and believable. You know,
so
fantasy is escapism, right?
yeah,
But you can't escape into a world you can't immerse yourself in. That's where the line lays between realism and unrealism. You have to balance things because, you know, a fantastical world can't be used as escapism if it's unbelievable. You cannot escape into it properly.
okay. I've never, admittedly, I've never thought to use war in that way because to me it makes sense for a war in a fantasy setting with developing countries to be utility based, like taking land and taking resources and stuff.
I guess, but what about you know, most fantasy stories follow a war. So what about that when you're actually in the story itself? Like, is that a utilitarian based war, or was that caused by character conflict?
The only character conflict wars I've ever written about in a history timeline is a good versus evil thing, and it's very concrete that this is evil.
That's boring, though.
You know, I know. Well, like part of my world is that like an entire chunk of the map is cut off because of evilness. I don't want to dig too deep into it, but it's like that Oblivion-esque hellscape
Yeah.
is a constant spread. It's spreading like a disease across the continent, and it's currently walled off by magical means.
Okay.
And there's wars over that.
That sounds fun, but not believable enough for my tastes.
I get it's a role playing game, so people can do
Oh,
whatever they
well-
want. If
well,
they want to
yeah,
start
yeah.
a war, they can.
If I was reading a book
But-
about it, though, that'd be another story.
Yeah, it's for a role playing game, so I'm not.
Which is
putting
mostly
that much
what you
effort
do
into
your
it.
world building for. I do mine for writing purposes. So I guess we're going to have some contention of, like, what's valuable.
Well, that's healthy to the learning process.
Yeah, of course.
Um.
So how about geography? Tell me about what you do for geography.
So what I do is I throw a bunch of pasta on a piece of paper.
I'm going to
No.
do that. I'm going to do it. Next episode, pasta world building.
So what I do is I outline, and I'm not very good at drawing because I don't do it. I don't even do it for fun. It's just
I know a
something.
guy you could commission maps from who's a pretty decent map maker.
I actually finished my map though. It was hanging on my wall for the longest time.
Oh, congratulations.
And yeah, so I usually outline it out, and I have an idea of what the geography's like,
Yeah.
and then I fucking write it.
Okay.
I write it in fine detail, and then I'll put like numbers on the map next to paragraphs and pages saying what's where.
That is something I had not thought of. That might be a good way to, like, keep my history in line.
Yeah.
I'll explore that. That's a pretty good idea, Zed.
Well, it's just necessity is the mother of invention, and where I don't draw,
Yeah.
I want to create a proper map, and like there's lines on the map to represent like country barriers, and
Right.
maybe I've put little triangles to represent this as a mountain range and shit like that.
Right.
And like there's an entire deserted region, but the reason that region's a desert. Okay, so this continent has all started out sort of like very lush and very green,
Okay.
but the entire top of it is the Oblivion-esque hellscape. An entire bottom left-hand corner, the dwarves have completely depleted the resources there.
I just want to
So
make a
it's-
quick point that it sounds like you're describing RuneScape.
I've not played enough RuneScape.
Really?
Yeah.
The geography you're explaining to me is kind of the main kingdom of RuneScape.
I'll pull up a map to see if I can. And then, like, so.
To the north is the
human-
desolate wilderness. That's the PvP zone.
I'll pull it up to see.
Okay.
So. And then the area with the humans is, of course, a little more cut down.
Yeah.
Not too cut down, but a little bit. And then, the Elvish area, the bottom right-hand side, is very forested.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, I haven't dug too deep. Like, the reason I don't want to dig too deep for geography is because I want my players to have a sense of control over the worlds that they build within my world. So there's certain elements. There's certain elements I want to be very concreted.
And then you want to leave the rest vague so that people can imagine their own headcanons.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's respectable.
Yeah, it is what it is. Like, there's things I want. Yeah, my goodness, all these maps are so tiny. But oh Lord, so keep talking while I Google. Fucking
Okay. Well, I talked a little bit in the last world building episode about how I do geography and just like, trying to keep things in mind because I love map making. It's a thing I love to do, and I just kind of I've got many versions of many maps that I like. I'll make a map and I'll be like, no, this would look better if it was this way, and then I'll do version 2.4, and I just keep things in mind, like how it would affect the people that live there, trade routes, and all that. So if I put up a mountain range here, what's that going to do to the people on either side of it? If there's a mountain range here, that means the river flows this way, Mm-hmm. And what will that, people will end up living on that river, and what, they might use it for trade. That, it could be used to move troops during X war that was happening in this place.
Yes.
And, is it hot there? Is it cold there? How does the cold affect this? Something that I like to think about is, like, when thinking of trade is, like, what is the main export of this area? Like, where do they get their money? Like, what does the geography yield for them, Like, this place, there's a lot of, it's a hilly place with a lot of iron, and they export iron. There's a lot of iron works there. And this place has got, it's forest, lumber, or out in the fields they sell flax or something. And this people, well, they built around this mountain that turned out had tons of gemstones in it, and it became like this ritzy place out in the middle of nowhere, and things like that, and like then how they move those goods, and even that, like how money affects the wars, and trade routes might be cut off, and places that were once like flourishing from things like that just go dead, and sometimes that's seized and used by others and whatnot. So one cool geographical thing I'm looking at right now, I'm gonna go ahead and spoil a little bit of Epiton if you're cool with that, because this is part of my own lore. It doesn't tie into yours really, but the creation story of Epiton is, so in the story proper there are 4 continents, right?
Yeah.
And so the creation story goes that there was once all 4 continents were one, and all the water surrounding it was fresh water. Like the water of the oceans of the world was fresh drinkable water. And on a mountaintop, like in the middle of the continent, like I won't spoil too much of what happened there, but there was like a big tragic event back in the mythical days, and it made like a goddess cry, right? And and from that mountaintop, she has been like crying for thousands and thousands of years, and her tears like flowed down the mountain and created a lake, which created 4 rivers, which eventually widened into 4 seas, and it turned all the ocean salty.
It sounds very Greek.
It is kind of, yeah. but that's like how I've kind of like, I won't say whether or not that is canon, but that's the creation story. And so that's kind of an explanation for like, oh, you know, somebody can look at the map and be like, oh, I would see why people would look at this and come to that conclusion, whether or not it is the case, you know? And just neat little things like that. I say little things, but it's a creation story, but I think it's cool, and I think it really ties into like how, you know, how the world is built.
Yeah. Oh, excellent.
Thank you.
I've not worked too much on mythology yet.
Yeah.
It's on my list, but I haven't got to
It's
it.
on my list.
First, trust me, it is. First of all, I'd like to say my map looks nothing like the old school RuneScape map.
All right.
I looked it up, and the geography is very different.
All right. If you say so. I looked it up and I changed mine real quick, so it's nothing like it.
No, I couldn't change mine if I wanted to. It's like a 5 foot by 5 foot thing that was hanging on my wall. But
well, I do them all on notebook paper until I've got my idea consolidated enough to like and then I do it digitally so I can change it later if I want anyway.
I used graph paper. So, something I enjoy, you know, we've talked about history, we've talked about language. You touched on mythology briefly, but I don't have anything to add to that.
Mm-hmm.
Creatures. What's your thought? Do you do creatures?
I do creatures.
Do you do original creatures, or do you?
Yeah, I mean,
cycle?
obviously they all have to be based on existing animals to some degree, right?
Maybe.
Well, not always. Not always. You can go like far-flung fantasy, but then that's that's something I reserve for the void, you know?
I disagree, but respectably.
Yeah. The void and maybe the ocean. But yeah, I like to try to keep my fantasy creatures like relatable enough to an existing thing that you can like still kind of immerse yourself and be like, yeah, that's the thing that's real that I like can understand. I can exist in this world and like accept what I'm looking at here because I kind of already have an idea of it. So, oh god, I guess Dur is one of the coolest worlds that I like really experiment with spooky looking creatures and just like weird off the wall stuff because it's like it's weird that I'm starting my series there because it's like one of the most fantastical worlds in the whole multiverse that I've created. And I'm worried that people are going to be like so impressed by it. That might sound pretentious, but I'm worried people are going to be like, wow, this is so cool and interesting. And then like some like more cookie cutter fantasy stuff follows it for several more books. Because I saw that happen with the Elder Scrolls series. Like old school Morrowind fans hate like how regular fantasy Oblivion was. Mm-hmm. And so I'm worried about that. But yeah, Dur is just one of those worlds that's like meant to be so weird that I really like try to alter the creatures like more than I would in other worlds. Because other worlds just have things like horses and wolves, and obviously they've got regular animals, and some made up monsters, but in Dur it's like even the regular animals are like so different that you would call them something else entirely.
Dur's one of those. It's probably okay. So history, all these worlds sort of started off back when me and him was in high school.
Mm-hmm. It was kind of a consolidated world building project that we ended up doing together, and then years later we kind of decided to develop our own canons.
Yeah, because we had creative differences with it.
Right, which I want to say like we never actually like had an argument about this. I don't think there was ever any bad feelings about it.
No, not at all.
No, which is weird. You would think there was like some kind of no, it should be this way, but we were both like going in different directions already. Like you wanted to make music about it and I wanted to make books about it. Mm-hmm. And so it was just naturally like, well, whatever, they'll just be alternate canons.
Yeah, of course. But so what happened is we were working on Dur, and I sat down one day, and I used to build books as a hobby.
Yeah.
And I wrote in one of my books, I fleshed out a universe and came up with the name. Well, not fleshed out.
You just
but
really made a list of 8 fantasy words and was like, these are the worlds. And then we both kind of ran from there and developed it.
I drew maps up. I did a very, very basic creaturenomicon. I wrote lore.
I forgot about the maps. They were so basic, but if I could get a hold of those to feed into my current building, I know. We don't have to talk about why that book is gone here, but man, how much we lost.
But it was so expansive because I was constantly working on it. I was constantly writing in like prophecies. I was constantly writing just sort of magical lore, where magic came from, the reason things were on journeys, artifacts that was in there, creatures and all that. But the reason Dur is so fleshed out, and I myself have personally fleshed out Dur, is because it was the starting point.
Right, it was the very first world we came up with.
And I would go as far as to say it was the most original.
I agree. I definitely agree.
I think, and I don't care to spoil it because I came up with this concept myself.
Somebody drag racing outside your house?
Yes. So, I live in the country. So, so it's been, I think Trent changed it in his lore, but the way I did it is every realm you go to, it either becomes more good or more evil, with Earth being the middle point. And so the farther down you go, quite frankly, the more interesting it becomes. And the further up you go, the more generic fantasy it becomes. And
I have actually held to that to a degree, because it was built that way. And instead of outright changing it, I'll tell you what I've done. I've created that original world tree and like a couple of others, and I've been like, I haven't actually. I have my own idea of what the canon for that is, but I'm not going to give it to the audience. I'm going to be like, here are the world trees, because my book follows a lot of like wizards, right? So there's a lot of scholarly. So I get to explore this world building with some collegiate boys, but like here are like 3 different world trees that scholars debate on.
Yes.
Instead of telling you like what it is,
Yeah.
Like that's how I'm approaching it. I'm not saying that I've uncanonized your original world tree, but I'm saying that there are multiple ones, and I'm not going to tell you which one is canon. In my canon.
The tree itself was never something I cared about. What I only cared about was the concept of the good and evil going into a fade.
Which I have followed that, because it's like and the gatekeeper. I think the gatekeeper was my idea.
Yeah.
And like the gatekeeper stands like at the halfway point of the tree.
Yes.
And so I am keeping that like it gets more evil further down concept by being like the worlds are like going rotten.
Yeah.
And the gatekeeper was put there to like keep that rot from spreading to the top.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Yeah. I don't know. I feel like we almost betrayed those higher worlds
by making them so. Yeah. I have been trying to expound on them a little bit more. Like the very top one, Starmine. Starmine, we kind of go back and forth.
Yeah. I say mine.
Yeah. I think you originally said Starmine, but then it was written as mine, so that's the way we ended up saying it.
Yeah.
But the top one, I have like a very clear idea of what I want that to be, but I'm never ever going to show it to the audience. And I'm not sure why, because I've developed it to be like, I think Starmine in my canon is the second most interesting world next to Dur. I know that's a big claim, but and maybe we can talk about that post podcast, because I don't want to say this publicly yet if I ever do, but I want to tell you a bit about it, since I guess I really haven't yet.
One thing I'd like to do with you at some point is work on a finalized encyclopedia of all these worlds.
Yeah, Yeah, I've got my big
And
binder sitting here that it's got everything in it, and I've been meaning to go out and get 8 different binders and like start organizing things together.
I'd like to. You see, whenever me and him get together, we always go on these adventures. But I think the next time we get together, we ought to just work on dirt.
Yeah, that would be
And
easier
just-
to do if it wasn't so hard for us to get together, you know?
Yeah, like I don't care to pay for the gas money for this trip because I feel like it needs to get done.
Yeah, I agree. And gas money's one thing,
I've-
but then just like the amount of time it takes
Yeah.
to get together, like I'm wiped from all the driving.
Yeah. Like one thing, I want to give Worlds 2, 3, and 4 more love.
2, 3,
bad.
and 4. Yes, yeah. I'm working on 3
Especially
and 4
3 and 4
currently. Yeah, those are the
Is it
ones
still-
I'm really working on.
The one above Earth, is that still a mirror realm?
Only
'Cause I feel like it
only in geography,
Okay.
which I
'Cause I felt-
am also altering a little bit here and there, like closing this piece of land, and actually there's a lake over there, you know, things like that.
Yeah.
But on the whole, yeah, the geography is Earth mirrored.
That was another idea I was always really proud of because
Yeah.
we used to do comedy with this world, and that
Oh
led
my
to some
God.
pretty wacky stuff.
Yeah, I feel like people almost like if we did that today, like would people like that more, like weird fantasy comedy? It's too late to
You
go
know
back
my
to that,
opinion.
but
You know my opinion on it.
yeah.
I loved the comedy.
That's why I've thought about creating 2 separate canons of my own. It like, you know, like we've each got our own canon, but then I'm like maybe I'll have 2 and this one's funny.
Yeah. I feel like I don't want okay, so he's made 2 stories, and I've read the first one. He never finished the first one, but the first one was comedy, and he got about halfway through the story and quit.
Yeah, because it wasn't really like a serious project. It was something I was like just scribbling in class, you know. It was the way I'd written it. The original story was called The Wizard's Log, and it was written from the point of view of the wizard character, and it was just it was like a logbook. It wasn't like a proper story. It was like diary entries.
That's how Dracula's written.
Is it?
Yeah.
Interesting. But that's how I was writing it. It was just like, you know, every couple of days I'd be bored at school, and I was like, I guess I'll write a wizard's log entry, you know, and just kind of like do that. And obviously, I was 14, and it was awful, and it's filled with 14-year-old meme speak. And you know, because it was all stream of consciousness, it's total, like narratively, it's shit. But a lot of what like I just had, like the random ideas that I had that were good, I'm taking those and I'm putting them in the good thing, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it was always Christmas whenever he did another one of those entries. They were so
Yeah.
much fun.
I remember
loved
you were
them.
always very excited. And I also did
Yeah.
Short one-off comics about the canon.
Mm-hmm.
Which they were always only 1 page long, and it was just like
Not always.
oh right, A Durish Christmas was like 20 pages long.
And you also started 2 Zeds are better than 1.
Oh, I never finished
it.
2 Zeds are better than 1. Yeah. Oh,
You
yeah.
quit doing
In
that
case
when I
anybody's
left.
wondering, the name Zed Dalen was moved into this lore. That's the name of like your character from it.
Uh-huh.
So yeah. So
It's a multi-purpose name. It's a very good one.
right. And yeah, I never finished 2 Zeds are better than 1. It was about Zed, the character of Zed being cloned. In case anybody hadn't figured that out yet. But those were the only 2, and then the rest were like single pages, and it was always like, you know, it was only funny if you already knew the lore. So there was a small group of people. It was mainly me and Zed, and this one other guy was he got really into it, and then a few other people who really didn't care.
Cedric's been on the show.
Oh yeah, Cedric. He was also a part of it, and he was the only other one who was really like any amount of deeply involved in it. But there were a few other people that were like, they knew, and they would read the comics and be like, haha, that's funny because I know the world building. But yeah, it was always just leading up to a punchline. There was one where the character of Zed Dalen got sent to hell, not hell, but the realm that is the stand-in for hell, to retrieve something. And like the punchline of that joke was, we actually killed him. The characters actually killed Zed, and he went to hell and got the artifact, and then the other characters couldn't figure out the resurrection spell or something. It was just funny, dumb shit like that. But obviously, that would be the
punchline is they went to get the Dragon Balls.
Oh God, it was, wasn't it? No, that was like a secondary punchline. That was
it was the final line.
Whatever. It was pretty cringy.
You think it's cringy, but I love it.
I mean, it's important history, and I do look back on it fondly, but obviously, it's pretty cringy.
Yeah. Okay, so we've circle jerked Dur for a little bit.
We have.
So we've talked about realm building. We've not talked about creatures too much. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna dive into creatures a little bit.
Okay.
Now, you mentioned that not building a lot of organic creatures isn't something that you do often.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to respectfully disagree. And if you look at like a D&D lore book or pull up a creature wiki, you'll see that if you just make a fuck ton of creatures and make them make sense and give them backstories and reasons and what they do, it can make a world just come alive and really seem just I don't want to say out of this world, but it just seems out of this world. So like you can look at a forest and say, what would be some cool crazy shit that would be in the trees or under the ground or hiding in the bushes? What sort of beautiful, fun creatures or abominations are there? Mm-hmm. What will kill you? Ooh, food chain.
No.
Creating your own food chain within creature building is really fun.
That's something I hadn't really thought too much to do. I obviously always separate them into predators or docile animals, but as far as the food chain, I haven't developed any.
Another thing, when I do creatures, I'm building a tabletop RPG, so obviously I've done more than this than a freaking novelist has for world building. But
fuck you.
Well, it's just utility.
Yeah,
we need different utility.
Yeah,
things.
You're right.
So, God, where was I? So I separate my creatures into two piles: sentient and non-sentient. And
I guess I do the same thing, obviously, but I guess I don't think of the sentient creatures as creatures.
Yeah. And it's really fun to do sentient creatures because obviously you're just making monsters, making villains, making good guys, whatever.
Yeah.
But the non-sentient creatures can be fun as well. Because it's oh God, what was that game? Spore?
Spore was so much fun. I didn't even have the proper game. I just had the creature creator.
Yeah.
That's all I needed.
Or the modern No Man's Sky, where it's procedurally generated creatures.
Yeah.
I've played a bit. It was my guilty pleasure for the longest time to play No Man's Sky, and I never had a problem with the creatures. They always felt believable because, you're in another world. It's of course they're not going to be mirrored to Earth because it's not Earth. And to me, that just makes sense. And it's exciting to see something you don't recognize. And of course, you want to throw... People expect dragons and goblins, but by creating a fuck ton of your own, I feel like I have more control.
Yeah.
And that's just my opinion on it,
Yeah.
It's okay to disagree.
I respect it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, as far as alien creatures go, yeah, I agree that mirroring animals would be maybe pretty silly.
Mm-hmm.
understandable, but like if you didn't, like on an alien planet, that's more believable.
Ooh, but that raises the question, like, these fantasy worlds, they're not Earth. So, by definition, they would be alien planets.
Sort of. They are, but they were at one point linked.
Like, well, think about it. Every fantasy story that's come past Tolkien has been... Which one's correct? I've heard both said. Tolkien? Every fantasy world that's been past Tolkien...
What's your problem?
It's late, and I got the giggles. So any point beyond his writing has been heavily influenced by his writing.
Yes.
If somebody were to take a blank slate and build an alien world, just completely alien, but be like, oh no, this isn't alien. This is fantasy. This has nothing to do with space, and just work from the ground up and make it fucking good, you could completely break that mold if you wanted to.
I guess so. You would have to make it seem more historical than wasn't this done in like old movies? Like fantasy worlds on alien planets, like a fantasy sci-fi blend. I think this was done like back in the day, right?
Well, yeah, it was done, but it was still the humans are going to see them. It was never...
Oh, it was never just consolidated to that world?
Yeah.
Well,
I don't think it's been done.
That sucks. Huh.
So...
I think you're the man for the job, though, dude.
I've come up with an idea that I don't want to deal with, but I will... Damn it, now that's going to be in the back of my head.
Ha 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 ha.
Fuck. Damn it. Okay, so
I just want to say on the fact that everybody's been influenced by Tolkien. I like praise this book every time I get a chance. So this came out like 20 years after Tolkien. This was written in the 60s. It's called A Wizard of Earthsea.
Yeah.
The fantasy world of Earthsea is super original, not really at all Tolkien inspired. Everybody should experience it.
Cool.
Yeah.
D&D is actually, it's expanded to the point of it being its own, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, it's expanded to that point, but like something like Earthsea was like built on its own unique foundation, and I think that's what makes it so strong.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas something like D&D was built on a Tolkien-based foundation.
That makes me want to scrap Terratopia, but...
Oh, no, dude. No.
God,
my stuff is built on a Tolkien-based foundation too. It can still be good. I'm just saying, Earthsea is like something in fantasy that is like very original. It's got wizards and swords and stuff, but like in such a aesthetically unique way. And like, okay, here's something that sells you on it. Like I don't like. I don't want to talk about social issues, but I'm like, I don't like the modern trend of like things being praised for like being diverse and whatnot, but like just using that as a crutch and not telling a good story or whatever. But in the world of fantasy, there is like kind of a lot of white European people,
Mm-hmm.
And in Earthsea,
it's based off European.
Yeah, which is understandable, but like Earthsea kind of does fantasy by like kind of not exactly basing it all on European. Like it has like most of the people in Earthsea are brown. Like I think like the main guy, he's like supposed to look like he's Native American, but he's in a fantasy world. But it's like you don't like feel like weird about that because it's not like based on a European thing so much. It's so much its own thing. Because it's a world comprised fully of islands. There's nothing big enough to be called a continent, and that's why it's called Earthsea. And there's dragons and wizards and stuff, and like not everybody's white, and that you can understand that because it's like not based on white culture.
Yes.
Oh God, I just claimed white people have culture. This video is gonna get.
People are reflective of the culture of their area.
Yeah. But
that's
I'm just saying
Earth.
Earthsea is very unique. It's very unique.
Yeah.
And it was written in the 60s by a woman named Ursula K. Le Guin. And the prose is kind of weirdly fast paced in some ways, but it's still readable. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. Everybody read Earthsea.
Earthsea. Okay, cool.
The first book is called A Wizard of Earthsea.
Wizard of Earthsea. So, what's another element of world building? Let's see. We've talked about creatures. We've talked about lore. I think we touched on religion briefly, but I don't feel like religion should be touched on that much because it's fantasy within fantasy.
Right.
So I feel like to a degree anything could go.
Mm-hmm. I always thought it would be interesting to explore the idea that so like back in the day, I feel like, Vikings would meet Greeks or something, and well, maybe this didn't happen that often or whatever, but it seemed like they could come to a point where, an understanding where it was like, nowadays it's like, well, I mean, I guess this makes sense with most modern religions, but it's like my religion is right and yours doesn't exist. But it seemed like back in the day, like you could meet somebody from another religion or something, and it was like those gods existed, but only for that people.
Yeah.
Like they were all in their own celestial whatever. And I thought it would be interesting to explore that in canon. An expansive world with different cultures that have their own religion, and the gods of those religions all do actually exist and just don't like mix.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that would be cool to explore. I haven't yet, but that was just my point.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm trying to read up on it, but I don't have the time to sit here on a podcast and look into it. But whenever Christianity went into Europe,
Yeah.
it killed off a lot of paganism because they viewed it as devil worship.
Mm-hmm.
And something that happened was the pagans still practiced secretly and disguised it as Christianity. So there are still Christian traditions today that have their roots in paganism.
Christmas.
Yeah. And I remember hearing about that in a history course, and I can't really think of any examples right off because I think I ended up dropping that course out of boredom. And I think that would be an interesting thing in world building because I talked about social things and socioeconomics and politics and even religion and social issues through religion.
Yeah.
Because it would make sense to have social conflict stem from religion within a novel, especially.
I think writers just don't often do that because it's so such a delicate subject socially right now. But maybe that's all the more reason to do it,
I think I'm just going to say one thing on that. I think people have a hard time separating fantasy from reality.
No. I can't believe it.
And I think if a bunch of dwarves killed off a bunch of elves and half elves that came from the dwarven takeover, so religion was a mixture of the two, and people got upset saying that was too political, those people need to fucking get off Twitter and go outside.
I mean, I fully agree. That would be very interesting. Kind of a mirror concept to what I was talking about a minute ago with multiple gods existing, or multiple pantheons existing in one world. So something that I was very impressed when I was a big nerd for Elder Scrolls lore, and I was reading about that all the time, was the fact that there was kind of a unified canon pantheon with the Divines and the Daedra, but different cultures in Tamriel had different interpretations and names for the gods of those pantheons.
Oh, I thought you meant like was a big nerd about Elder Scrolls. I was like, there's no was.
Oh no, I still am.
Yeah.
I still am. But like when I was like balls deep in that. But I'm not saying my point again. So what do you think
Fair
about
enough. No, I think that's a really good point, and I think that just happens naturally.
Yeah, and that's and that makes the world of it so believable because it's like, oh, the Khajiit, have this name for the god, and they probably think it's a cat because they're cats, and that just that feels so believable.
Yeah, that's it. Believability.
Mm-hmm.
That's really good. I didn't really know that about the Elder Scrolls lore. Like, I know a bit.
Oh, there's a lot of deep lore. Yeah, you came up here and you saw that map of like the whole world of Nirn that I had on as my computer background, and you were like, I didn't know there were other continents. So you're slacking on your Elder Scrolls deep lore, dude.
Fair enough. Like ESO, like people say what they want about ESO. ESO is one of the best fucking lore dumps.
Oh god, it's a lore dump, but you were actually telling me about it in the episode that I rewatched. We were talking about Elder Scrolls lore briefly, and I was making my argument about suspension of disbelief and how some of the Elder Scrolls games suck at that, and you were telling me that like it gets worse in ESO because it dumps all this lore on you, but it makes it not like as magnanimous. Is that a word? Fuck. It doesn't represent it correctly.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say? Like things like Daedra are too down to earth to even be like, I can't believe you're an out of this world god.
I remember you talking about that.
Yeah.
I remember the conversation now. I think it depends on certain things. Like, so individual lore, like cultural lore, I think is cool because you're experiencing it through history. You are fucking there because ESO takes place before Arena.
Yes.
And I think that's okay, but I think with Daedra...
Does it take place before Talos?
I don't know.
No, it doesn't.
But where it takes place before there, the suspension of disbelief is broken with Daedra, and I think it's a victim of its own plot there.
Yeah,
with that.
Because I think Bethesda and in this case ZeniMax have been like, people love to meet Daedra, and they just fucking throw them everywhere, and it's
no, people love to meet Sheogorath. There's a fine difference. He should be in every Elder Scrolls game. Like, he should show up in Fallout. He should show up in Doom.
You told me you didn't play Oblivion. You have got to play Oblivion. There is a whole DLC about Sheogorath.
He's all over ESO.
Oh god, it probably sucks, man. I don't know. The fact that he's all over the place is just stupid to me. Like
they did it well.
I can't say because I haven't experienced it, but I bet they didn't. But I'll tell you, they did it fairly well in Oblivion, I think, and maybe not as well as they could have, but again, that's part of the juxtaposition of Sheogorath, is the fact that he's the trickster god, and it's supposed to be like, I'm a god, and you're just like, no, you're not. You're just some silly Irishman.
The way ESO does Sheogorath and what I experienced felt in character. Because every time you see him, he's fucking with somebody, or he's putting you through some sort of weird trial, or something,
Mm-hmm.
Which felt like him.
So let us know in the comments down below if you've played ESO, whether Zed is correct or wrong and gay and stupid.
Fair enough. Have you played Daggerfall?
No, I haven't played either of the two OG DOS games. I think I tried to download them like years ago when I wasn't, was even less computer savvy and like just couldn't figure out how to run it. And then I was like, whatever, it looks like too much work anyway. Because it's like randomly generated, right?
Daggerfall is especially. They work flawlessly out of the box on GOG if you want to give them another shot.
Maybe.
So what's cool about Daggerfall is that You know how with Fallout, people who've played Fallout 2 say Fallout 2 is the best, and people who haven't played Fallout 2 say New Vegas is the best?
Yes.
Daggerfall is the Fallout 2 of the Elder Scrolls.
Well, I mean, it also literally is, just because it, is the second Elder Scrolls.
It's like it bit off more than it could chew,
Uh-huh.
and it did so much. It did so fuck. I never did send you that documentary, which I will after this podcast. I'll dig it up for you.
Okay.
But I feel like we've broken away from lore building a little bit to talk about Elder Scrolls.
I think we would understandably end up there a few times, just because there's so much world building within Elder Scrolls.
Yeah. So there's an argument to be made, and I'm gonna get into character, get comfortable here, get into character, and I'm gonna take the role of somebody that doesn't think world building is important, and I'm gonna debate you on it.
Okay. Go ahead and make your. All right. Let me get. Okay. I'm in my debate stance. Let's hear your opening argument.
World building to such a fine detail isn't that important.
Fuck you.
Because at the end of the day, there's only so much a reader can see within a novel. The history doesn't have to be that fleshed out. Nobody gives a fuck about language.
Fuck you.
Honestly, it doesn't matter. I mean, you need just enough to get by. Because nobody cares about that.
That was a pretty poorly constructed argument. But that probably stems from the fact that you don't actually believe it. But
yeah.
So well, I feel like I've already made my cases for like one of the points you made there was the reader's not going to see everything in world building. I've talked about the suspension of disbelief in storytelling, fantasy storytelling, how important that is. That's the case for that because there should be things that the reader doesn't see. There should be things that they don't get to know for sure, because a believable world has things you don't know, because even in this world that you experience truly, you don't get to experience all of it.
But why take the time to do any of that? Just throw some shit in and let fans make theories on it and just watch. I mean, you're putting too much work into the world building when you can just throw something in. They won't know any different.
I guess because I'm not a millennial. You're putting too much work. I am a millennial, actually, I guess, technically.
I think 95 was the last year for millennials. It's up for debate.
Really? I thought it was way later. What would I be then?
I think you're the beginning of Generation Z, actually.
Oh, shit. Fuck.
Millennial years. Oh, anyone born between 1981 and 1996.
Okay, so yeah, I'm a millennial.
We are both on the ass end of millennials.
Yeah, but whatever.
We are the ending of.
Whatever. Why did we say that? Okay. The point. So the point was, I'm putting in too much unnecessary work.
When you could hide behind the suspension of disbelief by just throwing something in.
Well, you can't hide behind the suspension of disbelief. You, as the creator, have to know what's true, so that you can hint to it. How can you tell a story? How can you show a world to people if you don't fully understand it? Maybe some of it is like too far, but like it does not hurt anything to understand what you're doing, I think.
I think you can bullshit thematically.
Sure.
I'm sure plenty of authors have bullshitted thematically. I mean, have you ever read a Witcher book?
Plenty of books that were bullshitted. Well, yeah, I've read plenty of books that had bullshit world building too, where the author was leaning on suspension of disbelief, and I could tell, and it's not good. They have to know what's going on.
I mean, most readers don't care about that kind of stuff. You're a writer. You're an exception.
Well, I'm a writer because I was at first a reader. You know, I'm, okay, final statement. I'm doing it for the hardcore fans, because some people will care about it because they're way into it, and those people mean the most to me.
It's a good answer.
Yeah.
Do you want to know why I do it?
Why do you do it, Zed?
Because I believe no house can be built without a strong foundation, and the wider the base.
That's a good metaphor for what I was struggling to articulate.
And the wider the base, the taller the tower.
Oh, fuck. That's super cool. I'm gonna say that to people sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's architecturally true.
Yeah. Well, that's a good analogy. Thank you for that.
Okay.
So, anything else? Anything else we need to explore here today?
Oh, I think you're the one who wanted to flesh it out. Now I will sit here and flesh it out if you want to.
Well, I think you were talking about doing this as a series, And
yeah.
When we get to the hour mark, we start slowing down, I feel like. So,
okay.
So we could come back to this another time and flesh out some more details, if you want to.
Okay, yeah. So I came into this with the next topic already chosen, and I think it expands on what we're doing as a world building series.
Okay.
And the next topic will be, well, it was creating an original character, but I want to dive deeper into that and do creating original characters and races and cultures. Because I still want to explore sociology, socio-political things.
Okay.
Culture.
Why don't we call that sociology then? World building.
We might get the wrong.
How
about sociology and writing? No, that's still
sociology in world building, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's much better.
Okay.
I'd hate to draw in the incorrect crowd. Because we have a brand now.
I guess we do.
I like this as a brand.
Yeah.
Because I feel like
this is just something
about.
we do a lot. We'll talk about it. It's good to talk about the things you understand.
The food episode.
The food episode.
There's been a lot of ClapTrap episodes that
I've been trying to go broad, all right, yeah, we need to consolidate into more direct things now. So, we talked about world building twice. We talked about story writing last week. Next week we're going to be talking about more world building, specifically sociology. So, tune in to that. Take it. No, it's my turn to take it out.
It's your turn. Take it out. Take it out, Daddy. It hurts.
Never.